So I'm Dr. Eliane Valijoro. I'm the Global Hub Director for Future Earth in Canada and the Executive Director of Sustainability in the Digital Age. I will be your moderator for this session. So I'm very excited that today we are presenting a discussion on how women's leadership will drive inclusion in climate action. This topic is critical as women continue to bear the brunt of the climate crisis. About 80% of people displaced by climate change are women, according to UNDP. The gender divide is also pronounced in the sustainability, finance, and digital landscapes. Two areas influencing society's ability to achieve climate targets. And yet, as noted at COP26 by the Women in Finance Climate Action Group, women are not just victims. Given the opportunity, they are powerful agents of change. Today, we have an amazing panel of 5 women who are working tirelessly to close the gender and digital divide, climate divide. I will be introducing each of these women individually and asking them a question related to this topic in their own work before we move into a plenary discussion and audience questions. Please use the chat function to ask questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible in the second half of our panel. So let's begin. So our first speaker is Jessica Gibbons. She works on the Global Partnerships and Networks team for the Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University. Her portfolio includes leading priority climate, technology, and conservation partnerships and networks for the most innovative university in the US, which was also recently recognized for its leadership and global impact for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So Jessica, can you set the stage for us and tell us about how gender, the environment, and the digital are linked? And what are barriers faced by women at this crossroads?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eliane. And so this is such a thoughtful question, right? And it's blending together these 3 topics of gender, the environment, and the digital age, which are possibly the most complex and dynamic ways to be intersecting these different parts of the Venn diagram. And so thank you for the question. And if to be able to first take a step back, I think, and talk a little bit about what is Arizona State University doing and how are we addressing these kinds of really complex problems and therefore the solutions that complement them as well. So ASU is taking this transdisciplinary approach and being able to solve some of the world's most challenging problems. And so we're using 5 core spaces to be able to address them at a top level. So there's discovery, there's learning, there's solutions, there's networks and engagement. And that this is bringing together this unprecedented amount of faculty and staff expertise in order to bring together the top minds so that way life can thrive on a healthy planet. And that includes not only the research that needs to be happening, but then also the kinds of educational and engagement outcomes at a university level as well. So it's just an example of some of the questions that our teams are addressing include questions around what happens with political destabilization events from climate change. Or is there such thing as ethical AI? And if so, who's responsible for being at the front end and designing those algorithms to make sure that we're being thoughtful about bias from the get-go? And in what ways can private-public partnerships support corporate commitments to climate goals? So these are some of the really interesting questions we're asking, and it's about not only bringing in technical experts, but then also a lot of the human dimensions folks, the social justice lenses that are so important in order to be solving for solutions that serve both people and planet. And so when I think about each of these really important topics, I think it's important to kind of be able to trace each part of those circles of that 3-part Venn diagram. And so first being able to explore gender and the environment and being able to untangle that relationship a little bit. So folks in this audience know that the impacts from climate change range from just about everything, right? So it's everything from depleted oceans, from overfishing. It's increasingly intense and frequent climate events. There's air pollution that's choking our cities and our rural areas. And we also probably know that women are disproportionately affected by these negative changes. And so we heard from Eliane that women are among 80% of those displaced from climate change events, and that they're also the ones that are bearing the brunt on physical health, livelihood challenges, food insecurity, gender-based violence, which becomes more and more frequent when there's more natural disasters and women are displaced. And so with women that are responsible for collecting food and water and are responsible for access to electricity around the world, you can imagine these problems are just magnified. as these extreme weather events continue to happen, and then the downstream consequences from those as well. And we also know that women are a quarter more likely than men to be living in extreme poverty between those ages of 25 to 34. So it's especially a vulnerable group to be thinking about with these really dramatic global changes. And we also know, though, but that women are the key to the solutions for climate change. We know, in fact, that climate change was discovered by a woman, that by Eunice Newton Foote, and that's often changed in the context of history. And so we know that women are developing incredible businesses and technologies that are intercepting some of those impacts of climate change. So we've seen regenerative agriculture businesses, 100% reusable makeup lines, all these really amazing solutions. And that's one of the programs that ASU co-convenes, is the We Empower UN SDG Challenge, which is honoring women-run businesses that are addressing the UN Sustainable Development Goals and therefore global impact. And so quickly tracing through those other relationships as well. So we look at the environment and the digital age, and we're familiar with some of the emerging technologies that are absolutely transforming society. And so that could include virtual reality and machine learning and AI, blockchain, drones, and that's just a few. And that each one of these is introducing a whole new suite of solutions, but there's also, they don't come without a cost. There's new problems that are also emerging as well. And so some of the really powerful solutions, just to take machine learning as an example, is being able to identify illegal fishing practices with Google Maps and algorithms that are able to spot fishing vessels that are in areas they're not supposed to be, or predicting soil simulations and nutrient uptake optimization through AI. And so we also know, on the other hand, though, there's a lot of really difficult unintended consequences that happen from these emerging technologies. So that could be anything from the mining practices and extraction industry for semiconductors that are really intensive on land degradation and biodiversity loss. We know that there's new kinds of toxic pollutants that are being emitted at new levels. And just as an example too, right, we're all familiar with Bitcoin, which is top of news right now, and that blockchain technology that underpins it is now consuming 0.5% of all the energy consumption on Earth, which is 7 times more than the energy consumption than all of Google's global operations combined. So at the end of the day, when I think about technology is a tool, and it's not going to save us inherently, but that it's also going to be able to provide some really promising solutions. And so tracing that last part of the Venn diagram is thinking about gender in the digital age. And so we've all heard the digital divide. We know that's become more intense and more front and center with the pandemic. And I think a lot of us have internet access we take for granted, but we saw that those really key challenges really coming to the forefront when it came to questions about school and access to learning, when it comes to internet connectivity and workplace environments that aren't enabled for remote work, internet access to telehealth issues, just to name a few. And so we know that globally 1 in 2 women don't have access to the internet, and on average 60% of men do. And so those downstream consequences in both the human rights dimensions and then the very real global economic impacts that come with that as well. And that it's estimated that it's nearly $1 trillion that we're leaving on the table annually by women not being able to contribute in the same ways, by not having the same access to the internet. And so to wrap and be able to bring all 3 of those really important topics together is to understand that there's these major forces at play on a global stage. And we know that women are disproportionately affected by climate change, but also hold so many of the keys for those global outcomes. So at ASU, just to kind of wrap it all up, one of the really exciting projects that we're working on is thinking about SDG training videos for parliamentarians. So it's a partnership we have with the World Bank and the Interparliamentary Union and the United Nations. And the idea is that we're creating training videos not only about the Sustainable Development Goals themselves, but the relationships amongst them. So just a few of those include women in climate, gender responsive climate action plans, addressing legal discrimination against women all across the world. And so being able to understand not only topics themselves, but the way they interrelate and connect in with one another is really where the rubber kind of winds up meeting the road. And so with that, I'm happy to hand back to Eliane, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jessica. This is just fascinating. It's very exciting to see what's happening. And so I'd like to now go to Dr. Janet Kawere-Macharia. She's a senior gender advisor at UN Environment. As a native Kenyan with 30-year career in academia, NGOs, and international development, her primary focus is promotion of gender and equality and women's empowerment. So Janet, in Africa, we know that many climate solutions are led by women leaders. Can you tell us about how trends may be changing in favor of women's participation in decision-making in this regional context?
Okay, thank you very much, Elaine, and I'm so happy to be in this panel. And once again, thank you for this invitation. Now, before we just look at the trends of African women in making decisions on climate change, we all know that the empowerment of women can only occur when women have opportunities to participate in all aspects of development. Now, the notion of participation, of course, is located within the overall framework of democracy, human rights, and gender equality. And central to this is the notion of active and meaningful inclusion of women as full citizens and as decision makers in public and private sector institutions, in political, economic, and peace processes. Now, large numbers of women, we find there are large numbers of women in office, and we know that they can influence gender responsive public policies. And when we are looking at climate change policies and practices, we know that they can influence and actually have positive change, bring about positive change. Now, we know that they also have a right to be equally represented and consulted in decision making, as well as also have the right to access to access to natural resources and equal share of economic opportunities and to fair and just land rights. But then when you look at the representation of women in the higher decision-making processes, let's say at the levels of parliament or Senate or even leadership as presidents, we find that we're still below that line. We're still below that parity line of equitable participation with decision-making. And that already has an influence in terms of how we'll be at the forefront of bringing about changes with respect to climate change. And even then, women's organizations are, of course, at the forefront of community responses in many countries, but they struggle, because of diminished funds, increased demand of services, restricted movement, and shrinking civic space. And we saw this especially as a result of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic over the last 2.5 years. But nevertheless, women and of course girls in Africa continue to play a critical role in climate change adaptation and mitigation, but mostly within their role in key sectors such as agriculture and through sustainable management of natural resources and conservation of ecosystems. I was actually fascinated by Jessica's intervention about the digital space. And I think, again, you find that in Africa, women's participation in this space is also very limited. And I think this is something that we can discuss even further. But I want to move away from the group of women as such and focus on young women. We've seen that certainly there's been an increase of the youth coming up and really having a voice in terms of addressing climate change. And of late, we've seen it is the young women who are leading this discussion. Now, over the last 2 years in Africa, we've seen young women emerging from different parts of the continent, from South Africa, from Kenya, Uganda, going up to Benin, Burkina Faso, going into Senegal and all that, all coming up to voice their concern with respect to climate change and come up with solutions. In February, I listened to one young woman activist from Uganda, and she was sitting in a highly powered panel, which made me feel good. One, because it would have been very difficult for women, let's say our age, to even have gotten into that panel, but there she was. She's in her early 30s, and she was saying it as it is, that we really need action now. The youth today are not talking in terms of theories and all, they're saying we need action now. So we've seen that trend of young women coming up in Africa, and they are the ones who are getting into the higher decision-making panels and also leading the discussion. We saw that happening most recently at Stockholm Plus 50 in terms of the top panel discussions. And their message is very clear. Let's stop talking about policies and theories. Let's go into action. In Kenya, we have an ambassador. She's Africa's youth ambassador for climate change. She's young, she's 11 years. And when she talks, you see that she's really, I could say she's a leader in her own space and within her, not just her age group. She is saying things that, look, let's start working together. Let's bring about change because our future is compromised. So I believe that we should now look at what is happening with respect to the young women who are coming up and are actually being able to enter that decision-making space. We're looking at Africa. Over 50%, about 75% under the age of 35 years. So that is the group we should be focusing on. That is the group whose leadership we really need to strengthen and give them more space to be able to talk with respect different aspects of climate change, and of course bringing in the gender aspects. So my view, Elaine, is that this is where we need to focus, and this is where the trend is. UNEP has a youth program, Youth for Africa program, and when you look into that Youth for Africa program, the majority of the participants are young women, and they're aged below 35 years, and they are bringing about change. They are now being recognized, and that is the lot that we really need to give a lot of amplification. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was really powerful. It's so important to realize the power of youth in Africa today and the importance of their engagement. And I love this idea, the 11-year-old ambassador. That is just really powerful in terms of really putting youth at the center stage. So thank you very much, Janet. So I'd like now to pass on to Dr. Rose Mwimbaza. So Rose is director of the UN Climate Technology Center and Network, CTCN, that connects technologies for low carbon and climate resilient development with developing countries. She brings 20 years of policy experience on climate change and previously served as Chief Natural Resources Officer at the African Development Bank. So Rose, what are the most promising digital-driven solutions for low carbon and climate resilient development? And where do you see women innovating in this space?
Thank you very much, Elaine. I want to start by joining my colleagues in expressing pleasure in being part of this distinguished panel and just really being part of this event. To say that actually, I find it's fortuitous we are having this conversation now, having come back from the climate conference in Bonn. The last couple of weeks, you may have heard about what was going on there. And it's really poignant thinking about what happened there and then listening to us having this conversation. So to start off first with what I think are the most promising digitally driven solutions for low carbon and climate resilient development, before I go to where I see the women, I can definitely tell you that for the work we do at the Climate Technology Center and Network as a mechanism of the UNFCCC, our technical assistance to member states is very heavily reliant on digital technologies, actually increasingly, and we focus on any area really ranging from using digital technologies for data collection and processing, modeling and forecasting, as well as other technologies like flood risk mapping, intelligent transport systems, and remote sensing. So we cover a whole range of sectors using digital technologies, both in mitigation and adaptation. So in mitigation, the most common areas in which we use digital technologies that we find promising are, for example, in improving energy efficiency of buildings, or relieving traffic congestion in urban areas, or reducing energy demands and accelerating uptake of renewable energies. We also find a high demand for use of digital technologies in monitoring deforestation and forest degradation. That is on the mitigation side. On adaptation, the most promising digitally driven solutions we find are in the areas of early warning systems and disaster management, deployment of digital technologies to enhance food security and support for the agricultural sector and food systems generally across the value chains, really. And then we also see a very strong role for digital technologies in improving resource utilization, the whole concept around circularity to curb excessive consumption and production that drives our current capitalist system. So that is just to give you a snapshot of where we deploy these technologies. And so we use a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning and big data to help the countries we service to understand their climate change, challenges and optimize existing systems. A lot of these countries are developing countries. They don't have a lot of resources. So how do we use digital technologies to help them optimize their systems and allow them to reduce their emissions and also increase resilience? For the Internet of Things, we work a lot with the countries we serve, mostly to measure the impacts of processes and human activity, largely through the use of sensors that can monitor factors such as resource use or air and water quality. I think it is Jessica who was talking about pollution, and then also providing transparency and efficiency potentials of systems across the board, let's say their energy systems. And then on blockchain, it's also emerging as promising. Here, really, what we are deploying blockchain and what it's enabling the countries to do is to create transparency and trust and engagement. And here, there's a real potential to improve areas such as supply chains, transparency, clean energy markets, and land ownership. In fact, last year, we ran a series of webinars for 6 weeks, training the countries that we service on the applicability of blockchain technologies for climate action. And we do this, I could give you so many examples of countries we serve in. So for example, in Benin, I think I will use Benin. In Benin, we are using digital technologies to support the countries on seasonal integration of weather forecasting and climate change monitoring, as well as drought risk mapping. This is a country that is really prone to droughts and extreme weather events. And basically what we are hoping to achieve in working with the government of Benin is to establish a digitally driven sustainable system for collecting and disseminating agro-meteorological information for farmers at community level to help them prepare for extreme weather events when they have to plant their seeds. The other example I would give quickly is Eswatini. In Eswatini, it's another small country in Southern Africa that is extremely prone to extreme weather events and extreme food shortages. And so what we are doing in the Kingdom of Eswatini is deploying digital technologies, largely working with unmanned aerial vehicles, what are commonly known as drone technologies, along with remote sensing technologies, and incorporating these in their early warning systems to support their agricultural systems. So where do I see women in all of this? It's a mouthful. It's a very interesting, what can I say? It's a double-edged sword. In reality, what I know for a fact, looking back at 20 years of how women have engaged in climate change, that digital technologies do indeed allow for leapfrogging. So at a time when women had to rely on word of mouth, if it ever arrived on time, to determine if there will be rains in the coming planting season or not, or if their harvest will in fact make it now, they can access that information digitally, because as I think Janet was rightly telling us, the majority of our societies in Africa and in many developing countries, food security at the household level is guaranteed by the women and the girl child, who largely support the mothers in this role. So digital technologies, telephone, mobile telephony, and all of these are really helping in that. But of course, as we said, the challenge then is the digital divide. Only 1 in 2 women on the continent have access to telephony. And so how do we then really ride on this wave and opportunity provided by digitization to enable access to the gadgets that allow for information? For climate change, information is truly power. When we used to talk about climate change, even just 20 years ago, it seemed like an event in the future, 100 years from now. We now know we are living in the Anthropocene. We know that climate change is upon us. The extreme weather events are happening. We were in the climate conferences last week, and everybody was talking about the extreme weather events in Europe. It's just June, at 40 degrees in Paris. It's incredible to see this kind of weather. So it's not just some small little country like Benin or Eswatini. It's really a global phenomenon, and it is with us. So how do we leverage that? The other challenge, again, I see, especially for Africa, is access to energy. Digitization requires access to energy. In a continent where over 700 million people still don't have access to energy, the dream of digitization and the potential it offers for leapfrogging almost all technologies becomes almost impossible, especially for women whose first priority when they have access to any kind of energy is to provide meals and warmth and for the family. So that is really the problem I see. But what I find extremely hopeful, this is a subject, obviously, for those of you who don't know, the UN Climate Technology Center and Network is hosted by the UN Environment Program. So when Janet was talking about the youth, that is something that is really important. We run what we call the Youth Climate Innovation Hubs here at the CTCN. And for me, it is one of the most exciting things we do because we are getting youth from all over the world to provide us with their innovative solutions to the climate challenges their communities are facing, whether it is food systems or rolling out access to energy using off-grid solutions that are combined with digital technologies. And it is incredible what these young people can do. We call them endogenous, homegrown technologies that are being developed by our young people. And I think one of the most pleasant experiences I had at the Climate Weeks last week in Bonn is presenting this to the Africa group of negotiators and telling them that as an African COP hosted by the government of Egypt, how do we elevate the voice of the young people, invest in their innovations and really scale them up, match them to the funding that they need, because a lot of the technologies really that will work for the countries in Africa and Southeast Asia must come from among ourselves. The assumption that everything must be transferred from the West will work, but to a limited extent. The context, the geographies, the localities are extremely different, as well as the cultural contexts. And so having young people, especially women, because technology is not gender neutral, it is very gender specific, and having women innovate for women to solve very climate specific impacts that women suffer adversely in relation to men is extremely important. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rose. And thank you for reminding us the importance of investing in youth in Asia and Africa. We know that by 2050, 80% of the population on the planet will be in Asia and Africa. And so how we invest in those youth is critical to how we're investing in the whole planet. So very, very important point. Really, thank you for all. I tried to share as many of the links you talked about. That this is very useful. And for any of the panelists, please, if there are any links that I haven't shared so far, please feel free to share them. I'd like now to introduce Kari Bojanen. She's the founder of the Rallying Cry, an initiative to catalyze new leadership and investment approaches to scale private sector climate and gender solutions in Africa. Kari has been operating at the intersection of finance, business, and society to build more inclusive and sustainable economies for the past 20 years. So this is very exciting because now we've talked about the technological background, and now we're really getting into how do we advance that investment space to scale all of these wonderful technological capacities we have now. So the Rallying Cry is about shifting capital to and shifting narratives about women leading businesses on the front lines of climate change in Africa. How are their business models and voices important for inclusive climate action, Kari?
Thank you, Aliane, for the opportunity to be part of this discussion with such an esteemed group, and of course, always for your continued support to the Rallying Cry. To answer your question, I will group my thoughts into sort of three parts. One, we need new climate leadership. Two, business models that we can learn from. And three, why the voices of women business leaders matter. And I'll try and pick up on some of the points that the others raised about all the different digital solutions that are available and out there. And also I'll touch a little bit on the voices of women at events like COP27. I'm with you, Rose, and in total agreement about their role being so important. So part one, just a few words on this. In my view, and what we're saying at the Rallying Cry is we need new climate leadership. More of the same is what has gotten us to where we are now, which is not in a great place. We cannot address the global problem of climate change without 50% of the planet involved, right? And without the practical lived experiences of those at ground level. We need climate leadership that is inclusive, collaborative, connected to deep collective wisdom, and in tune with indigenous local knowledge. We have the leaders that we need. We really do. But they haven't been at the table. This is what Rose was saying. They haven't been in the room, on the board, on the investment committees, part of the decision-making or the policy writing. They've been underrepresented. The rallying cry focuses on catalyzing investment in these leaders, starting with women in Africa, in the private sector. And we seek to amplify their voices, their stories, and representation by getting them seats at the table, or where needed, building new tables. So that's the first thing, my plea for new climate leadership from the leaders that we already have, some of which are on this very call. Part 2, the business models that we can learn from. There's a $42 billion finance gap for women on the African continent. And of course, Pauline will share probably a bit more on that, and I'll leave her to talk about what gender investing looks like in Africa. But I want to say that the rallying cry has parked itself in that $42 billion gap to catalyze investment in the women running the amazing, innovative, and climate adaptive businesses that few people have ever heard of, but from which the world can learn. Every day, we see African women stepping into gaps in the market, delivering solutions, often against the odds and without access to the finance, technology, markets, and networks that their male counterparts often receive. So to bring this to life and make this three-dimensional, I want to tell you the story of Sarah, one of the women that we've been working with who runs Kalomo Grain, which is an outgrower scheme in Zambia. I always like stories and it always helps me understand things better. So I want to share her story with you. She has trained and organized into cooperatives over 3,500 women to grow a variety of crops using indigenous seeds and climate smart agriculture techniques. She buys the grains and crops from the cooperatives for production into food and edible oils. And then to process near the harvest sites, she had to establish her own off-grid solar power generation because there was no power. She sells the food and edible oils to buyers and then reinvests most of the profits back into the business. The business is profitable, it's sustainable, and she's also now receiving calls from Europe and South Africa looking for alternative suppliers due to the disruptions in the agriculture supply chains in Ukraine. This is an amazing opportunity for her and her business, but also to start seeing Africa as a part of the solution or an alternative to these food supply chains that are being disrupted all over Europe right now. But Sarah doesn't have access to the capital that she needs to expand and grow her production capacity or to automate or digitize more of her processes. We heard a lot about the different types of examples of the ag tech and the climate tech that could be available to these types of agribusiness enterprises to create better yields and better production and harvest and understand what's happening with the rainfall, flood risk mapping, all of these things. But even more importantly for Sarah is the ability to make digital payments. She hasn't been able to digitize her payment system, so she's literally paying the women by hand. And the cooperatives of the women have been organized in groups of 10 with one champion or leader who comes into Lusaka to receive the payments for the women in her cooperative, in her community, and she carries it back to her village. This means that her personal security is at risk because she's carrying a lot of cash. But worse, during the COVID-19 pandemic, these women were the ones who had to leave their villages and go into the city, were exposed to COVID, and some of them, 10 women actually, ended up dying from COVID. You see how easily a digital payment system could have avoided such loss, in addition to creating efficiencies and accuracy across the business. So the rallying cry is working with Sarah and other women like her to connect them to the finance that matches their business needs. And what's exciting is we are seeing a range of capital providers emerging that go beyond traditional and debt and equity, many of them led by African women. And what we found during the whole COVID thing was that there actually is a real aversity to debt because a lot of families and friends of these women lost their shirts and their businesses. when the banks called their loans during the pandemic. We also see that a lot of women are loath to give up equity because these are their babies, these projects that they've grown from the ground level. And so we're starting to see, Pauline and I both, we belong to a growing, vibrant and collaborative network of women investing in Africa who are building alternative investment vehicles, which are much more tailored to the needs of these women driving these solutions on the front lines. So I guess I'm running out of time. So just 2 quick points, right? Why is Sarah's business model important for this conversation? Sorry?
Take your time. You're doing well. It's
Oh,
just
okay.
very exciting. So please take your time.
Okay.
You're sharing very
Okay, well, I don't want to
powerful
take up too much time. I want to make sure Pauline has enough time.
We have plenty of time. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So why is Sarah's business model important for this conversation? Why am I giving you this very specific example? Well, Sarah has created livelihoods for over 3,500 women, establishing climate adaptive farming practices to produce indigenous, nutritionally superior crops, while regenerating Zambian soil for future generations of crops and food security, all powered by renewable energy. I'm just ticking boxes here of all the amazingness, right? She is leading by example and creating change at scale. So my question is, what if we had 1,000 Sarahs? That would be 3.5 million women with better livelihoods contributing to climate adaptive solutions. What if we had 10,000 Sarahs? There are over 700 million women on the African continent. And I'm just saying, what if we had 1,000 or even 10,000? We could already change 35 million women's lives and be contributing to these climate adaptive solutions. So this is how women lead, by taking hundreds or thousands of other women and their communities along with them. And that's what we find so exciting. The rallying cry is focusing on finding other Sarahs, the women leading change at scale and connecting them to the capital they require to grow and further scale their solutions. We believe these solutions are not just important for people and planet, but we also see that they are profitable. And if you consider how we could add digital solutions into the mix, we could grow and scale even further. So the last part, why is Sarah's voice and story important for this conversation? Well, as Eliane mentioned, the rallying cry seeks to shift the narrative away from women as victims of climate change to agents of change. Leaders like Sarah tell us they do not want to be seen as beneficiaries when they are the ones who bring the solutions. The world needs to hear and learn from their lived experience, from their ground level knowledge and their indigenous wisdom. In addition to storytelling, developing thought leadership reports and case studies, the rallying cry is working to get representation of Sarah and other women leaders like her at COP events and other global climate convenings. Last year, the rallying cry member Prudence Mochunuota spoke at the UK COP presidency high-level event on Gender Day to say, I am here to represent all the women in Zambia who are not in this room. We all had goosebumps. It was amazing, but it's not enough. This year, we don't want to see these women leaders represented on Gender Day. We think they should be mainstreamed into all facets of the conversation as leaders, period. Their voices must be heard, their faces must be seen, and their stories counted in all aspects of climate leadership. We must shift their leadership from the front lines of climate change to the forefront of global climate leadership. That would get us at least one step closer toward inclusive climate action. And because we also seek to engage the climate finance community, perhaps one step closer to inclusive climate finance. This is our rallying cry. The time is now. Back to you, Eliane. Thank you.
Oh my God, Carrie, I could almost cry. The power of what you're saying, it's just very exciting because it really builds on everything that was said before and just takes us on this journey of what the future can be if we invest in all women. And so this is just really exciting conversation. I feel so privileged to be moderating this. And so now I would like to introduce Pauline Koval. So I have had the pleasure of knowing Pauline for many years now. And so Pauline is the founder and managing partner of a gender lens investment firm, She Equity, that provides smart investments for African female entrepreneurs. She's Equity's vision is to close the gender funding gap in Africa. Pauline Coble is also an expert on designing programs and policies that foster inclusive innovation in emerging economies. So Pauline, I'd like to ask you, why is it important to close the gender gap funding in Africa? How can we incentivize financing of women-led ventures in Africa and all over the world?
Thank you so much, Ariane, and it's really a pleasure to be here and be joining this amazing panel discussion. So the simple answer to begin with, Ariane, is very simple. As has been repeated, women represent 50% of the population and actually raise the remaining 50%. So any solution, anything you design and you don't include women, it's not going to be sustainable. It's probably going to fail. So that's like from like a high level perspective. From like a financial perspective, since we're talking about investment, so basically when now, as also Carrie has highlighted, in Africa specifically, today we have a 42 billion gender funding gap. So you might, feel like, okay, so what? The point is, in Africa, at the same time, 40% of SMEs are actually led and owned by women. So this means there's this opportunity to actually be unlocking all the opportunities, creating the solutions that have been highlighted here. But this is not happening because there's a gender bias, which means women are not accessing the capital. So last year, there was a report that was published to just show that this is not even changing. We've been talking about this quite some times, and that's why I'm loving about this conversation. It's about actions. So despite the talk at the conferences, this gap is not reducing. So last year, women received only 0.95% of actual investment that went to Africa, and it was somewhere around 5 billion. So think about it, and one of the challenges around this is, like, of course, existing gender bias that everyone knows about. Most of the reality is that, there is a somehow perception in general that when women are running businesses, it's almost like a charity, so that if you invest in women, you're just nice, you're doing something nice. Actually, this is not true. Of course, women are creating a solution that benefit everyone, but actually investing in women is a smart business. So a McKinsey report just showed a few, that was published recently. It shows that about 316 billion could be added to Africa GDP by 2025 if we could actually close this existing gender funding gap. So this is actually almost close to the South African country GDP, which is somewhere around, at least was predicted to be around 420 billion in 2021 and 2022. So imagine the whole country GDP being lost just because we have a bias, and also because the investment is in the hands of people who don't really understand the opportunity linked to investing in a business run and owned by women. So beyond the financial aspect, it has been also demonstrated that addressing the existing inequality have impact on other key aspects of livelihood, including education, health, food security, and climate change, as it has been highlighted. And this is simply because women reinvest 90% of their actually revenue in a sector area that benefit their families and the community and the society as a whole, comparing it to 40% for men counterparts. Again, you can see clearly that the trickle down is there. So you want to change it, address the existing challenge in Africa, you invest in women, women will take care of many other issues that we've been discussing about. So at She Equity, basically, we are gender lens investors, and all the company we have invested in are co-founded or led by women. And their motivation, number one, actually creating a business was always to solve a problem. It's interesting, like you talk to them, why did you set up your business? Most of them are very well performing, like really good traction. They could focus on a number, like I wanted to make money, but no, actually they saw a problem and they decided to create a solution. And then they created a scalable solution which has a market potential. So those solution includes things around, providing clean energy, providing a safe and trusted healthcare services, addressing mobility issues in the markets like Lagos and Nigeria, and the issues around food security, and of course also looking at the traditional practices, which I think in Africa we really also overlook. Like, I'm hoping that many people are familiar with the, our, indigenous crop called the fonio, that actually has impact on everything we're talking about, from like a environment, food security, and also because this is a crop that actually is handled mostly by women in the Sahara, where usually doesn't rain, like they have the highest impact of climate change. So basically, at the end of the day, we really need to see more investment going into women, and we need to change this perception where, according to a really cool article that was published recently, like if you are a woman in Africa and you are selling tomatoes, you're most likely to attract funding than when you say, I created an AI-driven company that is empowering other SMEs, supporting banks and financial services to be able to not miss out on a potential unicorn. Why? Because Africa is still seen sometimes as a place where people go to help. And when it comes to women, there's still a perception that African women are only running NGOs. So She Equity is an example to show that this is not the case. And I wanted to share a few examples, Rian, if I still have some time, of kind of company we have invested in that actually are demonstrating how betting on local innovators who are really creating the future and creating solutions that address everything that we talked about is important. So the first one is called Ekodudu, is based in Kenya. And so basically this is a circular economy business that is solving two problems. One is access to healthy and sustainable protein, betting on insect protein, and also managing the waste. So we all know, I'm assuming many people know that, for example, this kind of solution leads to two outcomes. One is, because insect, protein are seen as the food for the future, they had quality feedstock, and they addressed overfishing issues, which basically usually is done when you're producing fish meal. So through Ekodudu, you don't need to overfish because there's an alternative to basically livestock feeding. And of course, the other aspect, it's devastating deforestation that happens when people are producing soy meal, because that's another alternative. The second one is called Shatla. It's a company based in Nigeria, in Lagos. So basically the problem that Shatla is solving is mobility in Nigeria. If you've been to Lagos, you know how the traffic is heavy. But also the challenge for many young professionals is that how do you get to work if you don't have a car? So which means, like, number one, thing on your mind if you get a job to buy a car. So with Shattlers, professionals realizing they don't need to buy a car, because Shatla is providing like a transportation from work to to the office in a comfortable situation where you arrive comfortable, without sweating, and you arrive on time. Because for those who have been in traditional buses, that, for example, we call car rapide in Senegal, those buses stop everywhere. So if you leave home, you don't really know what time you're going to arrive, which means you can arrive very late. So with the shuttlers, basically being able to move, to have one bus on the road, it's an equivalent of basically removing 18 cars on the road per trip. And the shuttle buses do at least 2 round trip a day. So which means at the end of the day, right now they're running somewhere in the range of 100 buses. Again, running an average 2 trips. This means they kind of reducing the CO2 somewhere in the range of 38 million pounds of carbon, CO2 reduction. So, and we all know, like, mobility, like the cars are among the top polluters. So being able to actually have buses rather than taking a car to work, commuting in a city like Lagos that's growing, it's really important. and the other one I wanted to actually mention is the intersection of AI and also supporting SMEs called Superfluid. It's a company based in Ghana operating 10 companies. And what Superfluid is doing is basically supporting SMEs, but also financial institutions to be able to understand the markets, to understand the trend, which is very important because most of the time SMEs, they don't really have an ability to access the data from the bigger company. But also, as has been mentioned, the AI is not neutral. Like the way you code, the way you actually gather data makes a difference. So having an indigenous AI-driven company supporting the local entrepreneurs who are solving the local challenges, it's a key. And on the top of that, being able to service also banks and bigger financial institutions that so far has been missing out because they really don't know how to assess startups. And right now they're realizing that, few unicorns in Africa that they have rejected. So they want to be part of the story, but they don't know how to do it. At the end of the day, the key, Eliane and everyone, is to say, we can actually create Africa we want by investing in a solution designed by Africa for Africa and the world. And I will argue starts by us Africans, by the way, investing. That's why I'm originally from Rwanda. And I realize, we can always talk about the money not flowing on the continent, or we can catalyze the money and show people, because from investor perspective, it's always about perceived risk. And I feel like us Africans, we have the power to actually address those risks, demonstrate how it's done. We understand the culture, we speak the languages. And when you start, people follow. So we need the leadership also from the continent, rather than the other way around, where we're asking money to flow from outside. And to address the last part of the question quickly, I think the key to incentivize private sector is really for the philanthropy people to join hands with private people in a way that they can actually take the upfront risk to de-risk, in a sense. Like there's a whole area for blended finance where basically philanthropy can come in and recover some aspect that makes private investors stay away. Because so far, billions have been spent on the continent in the name of international development. We don't have much to show for. We have a lot of good conferences, we're talking nicely, but at the end of the day, it's all about demonstrating results, and the private sector knows how to do it. So let's just work together and make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. This has been such a rich discussion, and there's so much that has been shared. I'm really excited about having more people aware of everything that was discussed today. And Andrea and I and my team will be reaching out to each of you. And if you're willing to share your notes, we'd really love to have a collective piece that captures what was discussed today so that we can have even more people aware of the discussion we've had. So I really would like to thank all the panelists for the amazing discussion. So now we're going to go into the plenary mode of this session. And so we started last week sharing a thought exchange on social media, and some of you may already have received a link to it as we were just entering this session. And so the question we sent out was, how can we bring more gender equity to climate action and climate finance? So I'm going to drop the link. Andrea, if you could drop the link again just into the chat, that would be great. And I'm also just going to share with all of you yes, great. So that's there. And I'm going to go into presentation mode to see if I can share the results of the thought exchange with everyone. And so what's been really exciting for us is really this idea of how do we collectively contribute to changing the narrative and the space here. So I'm going to just share my screen. Okay, So what we've had is this is just gives you a sense of the results we have. We're going to keep this open and hopefully get a lot more responses. And so Thought Exchange is a great platform for collective intelligence. And so you can send out a question to thousands of people, and it analyzes the data by AI and just gives you a sense of what are we identifying, what are we seeing. And so so far what we've seen is that here are the top results we've seen is the need to increase climate funding in the hands of women fund managers from low to middle income countries to invest in local women climate entrepreneurs. We've also seen the importance of the connection between gender and climate needs to be more apparent, and that more people need to know about all of these exciting initiatives all of you were talking about today. And that we really also need to remember that access to high quality voluntary reproductive healthcare is a really critical element that we should not underestimate. We know that how the population grows and women's capacity for family planning and being able to have control over family planning is very critical to ensure that they can have families of the sizes they choose and be able to care for their families effectively. And so how we support women in family planning is very critical. And also the need for gender should be made part of curriculum for environment and climate studies to really ensure that all people in the space are more aware of this data. And so there's more data around the need for more women on board of directors and the importance of that. And also making more women part of decision-making at every level, from the funders to the fundees. We have to make climate systems more women-friendly. So I'm just going to stop sharing, but I encourage all of you to respond to the Thought Exchange, to share it widely so we can get more ideas, more ratings. And so we will be sharing the results of this on our Sustainability in the Digital Age webpage. So we look forward to sharing more results in the future. So we're now going to be entering the discussion part of this session. And so we encourage everyone, our participants, if you have any questions, please share your questions so we can have our wonderful panelists contribute to any of the thoughts you have right now. And I would like just to take this opportunity now in terms of all of the panelists, and we'll just go back in order. And just, I would like to ask from each of you, if there was one thing that you could see in terms of disrupting the current system and accelerate empowerment of women in this climate interface, what would be the one area you would like to see accelerated action particularly happening? So Jessica, I'll start with you.
Really good question. So I think, and Pauline, I think said it so beautifully too, is to be able to understand that investing in women isn't a risk, and no more of a risk than it is investing in men. And to really be able to highlight the existing amazing women that are solutionaries and that are already implementing these really beautiful solutions that wind up having this triple bottom line impact for people, planet, profit, and realizing, I think, because it surprises me all the time, and I'm really grateful to be in a space where we get to interact with women-owned businesses that are on this global stage and truly being impactful to their communities and to the planet. And then I think it would be doubling down in order to know that women are already doing amazing work and are not only investable and profitable and are solving multiple challenges at the same time, but to know that there's so much space and more lanes that need to be opened up and ran in. So to be able to highlight and lift the current women-owned businesses, I think that would disrupt a lot of the current ways of thinking that women aren't quite there, that women quite aren't ready to be invested in, and to know that we're already doing it. It's already happening. And to realize that those are going to be some of the best solutions that are going to be emerging and that are the best to be making sure that we're paying attention to, and also funding with the resources and capacity they need.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Janet?
There's not really like one thing. I think there are many one things that need to be done. I'm just trying to think of that one which I would come up with, but I would say really upscaling those initiatives that we never get to hear about, and which, if upscaled, can bring meaningful change. Going beyond dealing with the challenges Jessica just pointed out, and also Pauline also pointed out, and also Carrie, in terms of bring the women higher than just leaving them at the grassroots level. Having a woman saying, I'm representing women of Zambia, I mean, the example that Carrie said, we have even those in Kenya, we represent the women of Kenya. No, you don't. There are so many things women of Kenya or Zambia are doing individually, which need to be brought to the surface. It's not just the one face that should be the one represented. So I'm trying to think, going really, really, really to the bottom of the scale. Where are these women? What can you do with them? Is it a mobile phone that they need to get access to? Do they know how to use a mobile phone? Do they have an Android mobile phone? Do they have access to Wi-Fi? Having one phone is one thing, but then, do you have access to that information into the World Wide Web? And also in terms of money, we have a fantastic mobile money system in Kenya, and that has liberated women. They don't have to carry a lot of money, neither do we. For me, this is my bank, my phone is my bank. That is what we need to get women to use the phone as their bank, as their source of information, and such that they are able to really uplift their knowledge. So that's what I'm saying, Elaine, there's so many little one things, but for me, go to the bottom and upscale.
Thank you very much, Janet. Yeah, I know there's just so many things that's exciting, and so it's difficult, but it's really amazing how just getting people to understand that there are so many ways to enter and disrupt. So Rose, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think for purposes of this conversation, I would say giving voice and a platform to women as innovators and as solution providers, because for far too long, we've been at the short end of either being victims of whatever it is, whether it's climate change, natural disasters, bad policy, or whatever it is. And it's been assumed we're, unable, to provide, to either be sources of innovation or to provide solutions. And this is something I'm really passionate about, that there are very many women we don't know around the world doing amazing things. We've had some of them. Carrie, I remember Prudence's presentation at COP26 in Glasgow. We need a multiplicity of women. We need that critical mass everywhere, in all spaces and in all platforms. And I say innovation and solution intentionally, because for the Africa COP presidency coming up in Egypt this year, there is going to be a day on innovation and a day on solutions. And for each of those days, I've already indicated that we should highlight the role of women, but also young people. Africa is a young continent. Our high young population has the potential to be a big dividend for us if managed properly. So can we highlight those women who are innovating in finance and climate, but also are providing solutions? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think highlighting the upcoming COP and how those two particular events could be really powerful platforms to accelerate is really useful. Thank you very much, Rose. So Carrie, you shared the wonderful story of Sarah, and we were moved, and the 10 women who died of COVID and how that could have been prevented. Just as Janet was saying, if we could just have given them access to cell phones, that could have allowed them to transact and stay safe. What other things do you see we really need to keep front and central at this time?
Like everyone else, I have a long list. I'll try not to replicate the ones that have already been mentioned, because I think the list has been good. Good luck, Pauline, going last. Let's see. I mean, for me, I think a big piece that would be disruptive is to really get increased recognition, and I think Jessica was alluding to this as well, as the intersectionality, right? You can't address climate change without addressing gender equality. You can't look at gender equality without understanding climate change. And so I really, and this is the work of the rallying cry, is to break down silos. People just tend to stay in their own lane and just focus on their own patch, when really what we need to do is start looking at at these intersections, the interlinkages, and also the connective tissue between. So really about connecting the dots. I would like to see a shift in climate mitigation level finance to fund climate adaptation activities. That's simple. Big chunks of money allocated for climate at the high level that just never gets its way down to the ground level. So how can we shift climate mitigation funding for climate adaptation? And I think we all kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's invest in women local capital providers who have the solutions, who speak the local language, understand the laws, the rules, the cultural nuances, the operating environment of these women-led enterprises. I think in partnership, there we will get to the scale and growth that is needed and that the world can learn from. And then finally, just getting more equal representation at global climate leadership forums and events, including, but not limited to, COP27.
Thank you, Carrie. Pauline?
Thank you, Carrie. You just said it. I guess the only thing that hasn't been said that I think it's important is really to disrupt the aid as it is today. Because again, if you look at the billion that goes to Africa in name of aid and what we show for it, there's nothing. So imagine if there was a way that we can, you know, I guess impose that whenever you're bringing NGO money in Africa, a certain percentage goes towards de-risking small businesses. Because right now, the majority, especially women, the majority of options people have is actually microfinance. As a friend of mine, you know, keeps repeating, the problem with microfinance, it keeps you micro. The mindset is not really to help you grow and scale and take your solution far. If you look at here, I'm sitting in Switzerland, in Zurich, or you look at the US or other countries, no country has ever been developed by just, you know, depending on aid or relying on microfinance. Because so that microfinance mindset also means usually, it's the reason why a lot of people think of women doing business in Africa as people are selling tomatoes or being able to raise money, because when you tell a different story, it doesn't happen. So let's find a way that we incentivize the philanthropic people to realize that they can actually multiply their money, have a bigger impact by de-risking businesses that are profitable, but also has impact on people and the planet. Because in the long run, the money might come back to them, they can support more other people. Because without that, I think an NGO mindset and the business model will remain the way it is, which is really to put a Band-Aid. So we can disrupt the Band-Aid mindset and create the risking opportunity that will catalyze more private sector to invest in a really good business that impact people and the planet.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Thank you, all of you. So we have a question. So how can we best create more visibility on the global stage for the women creating these great solutions and businesses? Does anyone want to?
I'm happy to hop in order to elaborate. I've nodded it to a few times, is the We Empower UN SDG Challenge. So I'll just drop the link in the chat. And that this is a really powerful competition in the way that what it does is each year, this is in partnership that was initially launched in 2019 with the UN Secretary General, in order to identify a women-owned business in each one of the major UN blocks. So for Middle East, North Africa, for North America, for Asia. And so it's being able to make sure that there's true geographic diversity in the way of being able to make sure that we're representing different businesses from around the world. And they have to be solving at least 2 or more SDGs. So there's all these really fascinating businesses that wind up emerging. So things like 412 Food Rescue. And Eliane, I think you've met Leah Lazarando, who's an amazing founder. And this company is acting as if it's Uber Eats in terms of being able to rescue all food that would be disposed at the end of the day at a grocery store or restaurant. And they're calculating the amount of methane emissions that are actually being saved from making sure that that food isn't going into a landfill. And then of course, it's also being connected with folks that are vulnerable, mostly on the East Coast in the US, in order to make sure that's connecting food that would normally be thrown out and getting it to folks that need it. There's also businesses of women that are providing personal defense classes for women in the Middle East that are especially prone for sexual violence incidents, and making sure that they're empowered, and also being able to provide women that have been assaulted themselves the opportunity to be able to teach other women. And just one final example, which is one of our favorites, is the company E-Concrete. And so they are creating new kinds of ocean walls that are able to buffer storms. And the way that the concrete is made actually is able to replace in many times the destruction of coral reefs, and making sure that there's extra habitat for biodiversity. So all these solutions that are solving real world problems that are actually going to scale, all of them are profitable, and to even be eligible, I think it's $100,000 minimum in terms of net profit. So these are real solutions that are women that are honored each year. And so there's 5 of them. And so we'd encourage you, I think we just announced the last cohort, and we're now accepting applications. So also, if you happen to know any women-owned businesses that might fit this bill, please feel free to send them that link in order to make sure that we can consider them for this award.
So Ariane, I have a suggestion for you, maybe as an outcome, because I'm always a fan of, like, you have this nice conversation, it's really nice, we feel excited, we feel good, and then we go home, nothing happens. What if this becomes one of the projects that you know, part of your network, because you're doing amazing work anyway, you bring it together, those you connect the dots. I think they exist different platform where you can find example, but being able to bring it together under one umbrella, it becomes easier, and also removes an excuse where people say, hey, we don't see them, we don't know, they don't exist. And I think Carrie and I, we can work with our network so to support. I'm volunteering you, Carrie. I hope it's okay.
Yes, Janet, please.
Yeah, just to add on to what Pauline said, when I look at the panelists today, I think we're very powerful women in our own rights. And we can actually amplify the voice of these women businesses. We're in a position to actually have the world learn about these businesses if we know what they're all about. Today I heard about She Equity. I didn't know about She Equity, but now I know She Equity. I know about Rallying Call. I know about what Jessica is doing. Of course, certainly I know what Rose is doing because we work together. But now I know about that. So my business is to make that known. Look for, I think it's Carrie's project, which is in Nairobi, the Eco Doodoo or something like that. Talk about it. Keep on uplifting. Make sure that that is known. And I believe we're all powerful. So each and every one of us have 10 other powerful women, powerful groups that can actually uplift this information. That's something, like Pauline said, it's a follow-up for you, Elaine. See what you can do. See what we can afford.
Absolutely. I really intend to follow up. And as I, just listening to all of you, I was writing to my team and I was like, we need a blog with everything that was shared today. And so we're going to follow up. And if you have any notes from your talking points, we're going to use them and have a co-authored, piece with all of us as co-authors. And we'll also share all the links in the chat, and we'll make that a permanent page on the Sustainability in the Digital Age website. And we may actually just create a gender and finance and climate section on our website. This is just coming, as we're talking. So, my team's going to just, be working furiously to get this out, and I'm very excited. And we're also going to make sure that, this video is also made available on the website so we can all share it and have more people participate. And so, Carrie, on to you.
Sorry, I know we're almost out of time, but just a couple of things. Agree with everything that everyone else has said. And I guess, the rallying cry part of our whole piece of work around shifting narratives is to create these platforms. So we're advocating to get women into representation at COP27, working within what's there. In addition, we did this last year, we wanted to have women from the ground level represented in the side events that are not necessarily the official COP events. And I think a lot of magic happens outside of the actual official rooms. And so we wanted to participate last year in the She Changes Climate event, which if any of you had not had a chance to see it or be part of it, it was a whole event for a whole day of all the amazing women doing amazing things in climate across a whole range of disciplines that nobody in the main rooms was actually giving acknowledgement of or to, right? So if somebody said, where are all the women? They were there in droves doing amazing things. And so She Changes Climate this year is going to be organizing a women's leadership summit during COP, which will be virtual and 24 hours going around each of the hours of the time zones around the world, starting with Australia, where the women's vote pushed out the current government on a gender and climate platform. So they're going to kick it off and go around the world. So if you have opportunities to bring women's voices to those conversations or representation, I think that's a great opportunity. And of course, any kind of event where we have an opportunity like this or future events, I brought Sarah into the story today, but next time I want Sarah to tell her own story. And so really trying to elevate, amplify, and raise these stories that need to be told. We're also trying to participate potentially in a storytelling ambassador program, which is called 8 Billion, which will be coming up and it's featuring African stories this year as the first set of stories of the 8 Billion. And that's going to be done in partnership with Water Bear, and I think the woman who directed My Octopus Teacher for Netflix will also be involved with that amazing project. So loads of different ways, but we're just putting those voices, those stories out there. And last but not least, I think we also not only have to change the narrative, we need to change the images of women. It's always the 3 Ds, right? Death, devastation, disease, drought. I don't know what it is, but I mean, even when we're trying to produce our reports, hello, stock imagery, it's always like a woman standing in a devastated field with like a baby on her boob or on her back. Can we get some amazing kick-ass images of African women doing cool stuff and just get a whole new stock library out there for the world to see? So we also see the imagery changing about African women. So I'll stop there.
So all of you, you're just reminding me of Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi's TED Talk around the danger of a single story and the importance of having these different narratives and these different faces to show the power of engaging and supporting women in the accelerated changes we need to see in transformations over the next 8 years if we're to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, and the importance of that. And so one of the things that I see that's really critical is sharing more of these stories. So Pauline, go ahead.
I just wanted quickly to also add, like, there's a power in numbers as well. Like, being able to collect different story from more people, because what happens is like you show us somewhere and you share about what you're doing, and people think you are unique because you're focusing on Africa. That's actually not a necessary compliment, right? So we need to collect also more positive story where people see there's a number, this is becoming a trend, it's mainstream. Because you remember the leadership takes a time, people want to be leader, but the majority of people are followers. So if you can show that the leadership has happened, show concrete example or positive side, the whole discussion we're having about attracting investors, they will come if they realize they're missing out. And I think that's the narrative we need to be talking. How do we create a pull mechanism so actually they start coming to us rather than us knocking on the doors?
So I love this idea of creating a buzz around, fear of missing out, and how do we accelerate that and really create such an excitement that we want everybody to move in that direction. So Rose, I see that you're sharing a link. Can you just tell us a little bit about it?
No, it just occurred to me actually when you're talking that I did write a short article on women as the face of the green Africa and digitization, just sharing that. But just to say, it's great when they say great minds think alike, just to say that I really appreciate and agree with everything that the ladies have said, that it's true, we are the change, it starts with us. It is within our capacity, each of us individually and collectively in the spaces we occupy or have access to amplify those voices. In the networks, we are able to connect these women, but also to create those opportunities and multiply them where we are. Because you're right, as long as we lack the critical mass, we won't get the voice, the action we need. But two, I like the last point that has been made. images are powerful, and we must change the narrative of the image of the African woman. It's not to say that we are oblivious to what goes on in the continent, but how do we inspire a new narrative, a new hope for Africa? How do we inspire the young people? And I remember once there was a huge conference. I like the young people, they are fearless in speaking the truth to power. There was this young woman and they were promoting agriculture among the young people. And there was an old tired woman carrying a basket. And she said, I quote her words, "How in the hell do you expect us as young people to even consider agriculture as a business option for young people when these are the images you present?" So to show the women the possibility, what is possible, I think that aspirational call to what is possible is very important. It's not to deny the reality, but I think it's important for women to begin to aspire above and beyond what their circumstances tell them or what society says they can or can't be. And so imagery really is very important, and also intentionally and consistently presenting the images of those women who are innovators, providing solutions in finance like Pauline and everywhere else. So thank you.
So thank you, Rose. You're just making me think about, we have about a bit less than 10 minutes left. And I'm thinking, if we were to meet again in 2030, what would be, in less than 2 minutes for each of you, what would be the story you would like to tell about what we were able to achieve, what your organization, your networks were able to achieve? So who would like to start?
I'm happy to kick it off if that's okay. So, I mean, right. So when I think about our organization, and we're in the Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory, is the really simple, not easy, but simple idea of life thriving on a healthy planet. And that we also, one of our taglines that we use consistently is the idea that the future is for everyone. And that right now the future is oftentimes being designed by a very narrow group of folks. And that you can imagine the downstream consequences that are happening because of that. And that when I think about this intersection and what we've been able to talk about today in terms of women in the digital age and what is the relationship with environmental impacts, that when I think of what success looks like when we're looking down the road at 2030, and ideally we've gotten very close to solving the Sustainable Development Goals, I think specifically in that context with those three domains is being able to open up. I think the definition of technology is really important, and I think we're told by Silicon Valley and by Western culture oftentimes that technology is AI and it's drones, but really a technology could be agricultural innovations in terms of what are you using on your farm, and that technology is not just semiconductors and microchips, and to be able to have the humility to know that technologies can take all sorts of different shapes, and that they are at the end of the day a tool, and that they're as strong and as powerful of a solution, but then also, of course, as we know on the other side of the coin, can also create those unintended consequences. So I think this really thoughtful approach of understanding that technology is not going to save us by itself. Therefore, we need to be asking who's sitting at the table. I love this idea of even building new tables and being able to bring folks that have never had this chance to contribute to solutions, and that truly we're accomplishing this idea that the future is for everyone.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jessica.
Sorry, just for clarity,
okay.
What is the question again exactly?
So
I was so busy
imagine,
listening to Jessica's amazing answer, then I was like, oh, what's the question?
So the question is, if we were to meet again in 2030 and everything you'd wanted was achieved, what would you be saying that you achieved? So yeah, I'm going to just let Janet, she had her mic open.
Not really me as much as UNEP. Our world, we have this, our vision is target to people and planet, but I'm having a vision where, a situation where we never have to use the word like vulnerable women, vulnerable young girls, vulnerable populations. We have now dealt with all these vulnerabilities, and you've got that smiling face, irrespective of which part of the world you're coming from. we have achieved. We have managed to address those challenges that have been brought about by environmental degradation. So I'm just trying to have a visual, what it would be like, and it's a collective effort. It can't be what I have achieved. It's actually a collective effort. Yeah.
I love that, this idea of if we took all that vulnerability and had creative solutions that have been produced over the next 8 years. Love, love, love that.
I can go next.
Yes, go ahead.
I think for me, the number one achievement would be like that we see diversity among the capital allocators. Because right now, when you look at the landscape, it's a male, white dominating the investment landscape, which is the reason why we have the gender funding gap across the board, right? So I will have a room like a 50-50 investment manager discussing about investing, which will by default translate into a democracy in accessing the capital down the road. And of course, the impact and the right solution being backed, because that's what women do. If also that's what diversity in terms of decision-making does. And the other part would be for me to eventually see that in terms of investment processes, that gender and climate change, any other impact-driven businesses are scoring high, because right now the way, if you're doing an assessment for investment, gender is seen as a risk, negative, you want to be careful. So I would want to see that actually every fund manager want to have a gender, portfolio want to have a gender in their portfolio, gender-driven businesses in their portfolio, but also looking at beyond, again, as Carrie said, because it's implied, and we see it at Share Equity, that most of the business created by women, they're really looking at the broader perspective, because they know, like, if they ignore climate, this is not sustainable down the road. But we want to see that that's a part of the investment process, which again would translate towards funding the right businesses. And at the end, I would want to see that we're no longer discussing these things. Like, actually their actions, like, because the things men don't discuss, why are we discussing this? So we want to see more action than discussions around gender, climate, because it's happening.
Thank you, Pauline. Rose?
I am afraid this may sound a little bit maybe academic, but I'm reading this interesting book that has inspired me. I first saw the next Netflix special and I decided to buy it, Breaking Boundaries. Obviously, because I work around climate science and technology, this is quite interesting. But I think what I found truly profound when we all think about it, because it's not really groundbreaking, but it's just something to intentionally think about, is that since 1972, we have grown exponentially and reached the limits of growth. But we haven't actually achieved gender equality or eradicated poverty or allowed everybody to achieve success. So what kind of disruption do we have? Pauline has been talking about this and how our development aid model is really a band aid. And so to have the brevity to really interrogate everything we know as we know it now, the development paradigms, the way we present women. So really, if I were to come back 50 years from now, 50 is important if you work for UNEP, because we've existed for 50 years, a more equitable world where we are not really having a conversation on whether women should be on the table, or if we are going to destroy ourselves through a climate catastrophe of our own making, and if we can solve it, because as long as we continue to exclude women, then of course, I think the best analogy that was given by a leading African leader is like boxing with one of your hands tied to your back, hoping to win. It's just common sense, and it baffles the simplest of minds that we still we are still having this conversation whether or not we should have women at the table on equal footing in all areas as solution providers. So Really, that would be my take.
Thank you, Rose. Carrie?
I would echo, I think, a lot of the things that have been said here. I would definitely want to see a shift in capital from the top levels down to the local capital providers at the local level and into the hands of the women. So everything would be well financed and growth and scale would be happening at the speed of light, and solutions would be blossoming up and exploding all over the African continent, and everybody would be looking with a microscope and binoculars to see all the exciting innovation. I think we'd see 50-50 representation at COP. I don't know if anyone noticed or heard about this last year, but I'm still aghast by the fact that the second largest contingency at COP last year was the oil and gas industry. Hello, I would love to see huge amounts of African women from the ground level at this COP27 coming up. And not only that they're included, but that people are literally picking up the phone to call them and say, what should we do today? What should we put on the agenda? Who should we be talking to? Where decision-making is inclusive and led with ground level lived experience and Indigenous knowledge. That would make me super happy. And I guess coming back to this issue of intersectionality and the interlinkages, I think we need to remember that complex problems require complex solutions. And a lot of times everything is just going to be fixed with keep it simple or just focus on one thing. We can only do one thing at a time. Well, come on, women are masters of multitasking. We know that it takes a much more complicated approach to solve difficult stuff. So we will have succeeded in leaning into the tough stuff through networks and through connecting the dots and through breaking down the silos and working in collaborative forms that deliver the really beautiful parts of the best of collective wisdom.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Rose. This has been a phenomenal conversation. We are going to take it up and we're going to create a platform on our website to share all the amazing things that were shared today. And we look forward to continuing this conversation and to hopefully in 2030 be able to tell the stories of what we have all collectively accomplished for humanity, for vulnerable populations to become empowered and use their creative energy for more inclusive innovation for the planet and humanity. So I'd like to thank everyone for your participation, our panelists for everything you have done that has led you to this moment. Wishing you health and power to continue the journey forward, and thanking you for all you do for humanity and for the planet. Thank you, everyone.